Hello, and welcome to another Inkarnate live stream. My name is Mati, and today we're going to be doing globe maps. Are you tired of doing the same flat, rectangular map projections? Well, this stream might be for you. Globe maps are very fun to make, not as difficult as you think to make. Players love them, and they're kind of interesting to put together, so it's not as complicated as you think. So I'm really excited to take you through my process. Now, if you're not sure what exactly I mean by globe maps, I can kind of give you some examples here. So this right here was made, this kind of a magical item was made, or the globe was made with the same technique I'm about to show you. This map right here was also made with the exact same technique that I use. I'm going to be showing you, and this one as well, which is probably the closest to what we'll be working on. All right. Now, before we jump into that, I want to real quickly just do a quick announcement. If you go up to the bell and you see what's new when you hover over it, you'll see that we have a new Catan and Inkarnate contest. So Catan is a really fun game. It's a strategy board game where players gather resources, trade, and build as they explore the uninhabited island of Catan. I've played it before. A lot of other people love it. Go ahead and click that Reddit contest link. I'll hover right over it. And if you go ahead and just go over to that link, it'll take you to the Reddit post, and it will give you all the details on the rules and everything like that, what the reward is if you win. So super cool contest. Go check that out. Super excited about that. That's cool. One of the first things you're going to want to do is probably clone and edit this map. The link to that map will be put into the chat, so go check that out when it becomes available. And if you don't want to use it, that's fine. You can go ahead and just start from scratch. That's perfectly fine. I'm going to go ahead and open up the map and we'll get started. I hope everyone's having a good week so far. I took a lot of time to really work on to give prep for this stream, so I'm super excited to do this with people. I love globe maps. It's a map projection. It's really fun to make. Okay, all right. Ooh, and we are live. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's get started. So making a globe map first starts with the basic shape, right? We want to figure out how do we make the standard shape for a globe. Obviously, you're going to want to use a circle to represent the sphere. And if you want to make it more three-dimensional, then you would do lighting and shadow for that. And we'll cover that. We'll cover that too. First, let's show you how that I make. Let's turn the FG and BG on, and I'm going to show you how I do that. And if you go, what we've done is the default layer for any new map is going to be the BG layer. That's anything made with the subtract mode of the mask tool. The globe is going to be made with the add mode of the mask tool. And you're going to use this circular shape, this ellipse shape, and it's set to snap. So let me go ahead and turn the grid on so you can see. Let me turn that grid on. And I set the grid to where it was black with no shadow so that the grid only shows up on the FG because the BG has a lot of black on it. So the grid will only show up on there. Now, if you take that circular shape and you go down like this, it will snap to each grid cell. And what you want to do is, I think it's either the Alt or Start key, depends on which device you're using, Mac or Windows. If you just hold that while you click and drag, it should click it into place. Just zoom it up and make sure that it's going to be perfectly circular and not oval or anything like that. But so if you click that Start or Alt key, you'll be able to drag and hold, and it will become that right there. Now there are mask effects, particular mask effects that I'm using as well. And I'm not going to show them or leave them on, but I'll show you what they are and why I'm using them. So let me enable the mask effects real quick. So I'm using a white stroke, that very thick white line that you see. That's going to be counting as kind of the horizon. I'm using a white line to represent that. There's also an outer shadow, which is white to kind of give that glow because it's the light reflecting off of the planet. There's a lot of water, right? And there's also an inner shadow, which is kind of a darkish color. It's black, and it's kind of giving it kind of a more spherical feel to it because it has that shadow. So definitely memorize these settings, and then you can use them and change them as you see fit. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the mask effects off. Sometimes when the mask effects are on, especially if you're in a higher editing resolution like 3 or 4, that can kind of cause some lag. So just turn on mask effects when you need to use them. Hey, first time chatter. Saboy Bum, nice to see you here. Hey, Quito. Awesome. All right, so that's how you make the first step, right? Now, once you've added that, the next step is you probably want to add some line work to it, right? Because the line work is going to help you to make your axis, your equator, your longitudes, and your latitudes. So let's go ahead and start with that. When I normally start with a globe map, I start with the axis and the equator. The equator is the horizontal line that goes directly in the center. That's the equator. And then the axis line goes from north to south in the center. That's where the planet spins on its axis. And I usually use text or the path tool. With text, what I normally do is use underscores like this. Or you can use the path tool. Path tool will be easier. But when it comes to the longitude lines, you're going to have to use text, and it's going to have to be curved, and we'll get to that. So just start with your equator and your axis. That's where you need to start. And I went ahead and used text, and I changed the blend mode to overlay for a reason, because I like overlay. It just overlays, and if it bleeds off into the black, like if your lines go over into the black, overlay won't show up on those black regions. It'll only show up on the lighter colors, okay? So really helpful to have that grid up. The grid is on. You notice how I lined up my axis and my equator with the grid as a guide. Your grid is going to be a technical tool in which you use to make all the different parallels and meridians, and for making your equator and axis. So definitely have your grid on to help you as a guide. Once you've done that, I like to label where things are. Okay. So I have a North Pole, a South Pole, and an equator. It's just so that I have those labeled. It's important to know what is what. So I'll go ahead and just label this. So you have your north and your south poles, and you have your equator, which is that center line. After I've done that, then I like to work on my longitude lines. And the longitude lines go from north to south pole. And normally there's about 36 of them on your standard globe. Now, we're not going to be adding that many longitude lines because it takes up a lot of space, and it's a lot of text that you have to bend and kind of contort to work properly so that they bend and connect to each pole, the north and south pole. So it's up to you on interpretation, but technically, generally, there's about 36 of these on an average globe. Again, we're not going to be doing all that. That's way too much. It takes up all this room, and it's a lot of work to do. So I don't recommend that. Now, with each one of these, what I try to do is I try to cut, once you've made one side of the longitudes, then you can go ahead and just copy and paste, just group it, label it longitudes, and then copy, paste that group, and then just flip those lines around. So you'll notice that I'm flipping them like this. I'll bring them over to here. Oopsie, it's still spinning. A little bit of lag. Okay, let's spin it here. There we go. And then line them up properly. So you only have to do one side, and then you just copy and paste to do the next side. And you know, making these longitude lines didn't take very long. It only took me about 5 minutes to make these. Once you kind of get the general idea of adding more underscores and then changing the curve for each one, it gets really easy to put together. It'll become second nature for you. So you have to do it a couple times to kind of get it. But it doesn't take more than about 5 minutes. Maybe on your first try, maybe it'll take 10, just to try to make sure that things are lined up and you got it right. And don't forget to use that grid, because the grid is really, really helpful. Notice that I'm using the grid where I line up each one of these longitude lines. Of course, once you've added that down, then I can go ahead and change this to latitude, or change this, or actually I'll just group the whole thing, and these two will be the same thing. And then the next one is going to be what's called your latitudes or your parallels. There's about 15 average on a globe, but you don't have to add every single one of them. Again, that takes up a lot of room, but they're a little bit easier to make because it's just straight lines. They're not curving to each one of the poles or anything like that. So they're just straight lines. And again, I use the grid to separate them. The most important lines are really going to be the equator, but you can also include like the Arctic, the frigid zones, which is your Arctic and Antarctic. It's up to you how much detail you want to go on your globe. Obviously, more detail means more work. Okay, let's go ahead and turn that off there. Now that we've finished that, and what's really cool about this is once you've done that, once you have the line work, then you can kind of rotate it anywhere you want. So if you want to have it be, oopsie, I've got to change it up a little bit here, line it back up. Once you have that done, then you can rotate it because most planets have a tilt on its axis, so you can absolutely do that. Now, just for the sake of this one, I'm not going to tilt and change the axis or anything because we're just going to use a straight projection. I'm not going to do anything rotated like that. You totally could if you wanted to once you've kind of finished things up, but for now, I'm just going to leave it straight on like this. And I'm not going to need the line work right now, but you can turn it on if you want, if it helps you to make the landmasses. Now, when it comes to landmasses, I have to mention that because the globe is made with the add mode of the mask tool, it's not as simple as just using the other layer, which is the BG layer or the subtract mode, to make the landmasses, because you'll lose the globe shape. So the way that you go about putting landmasses down is to use the path tool as a guide to make your landmass and then paint into it. So let me add that first biome right here, which is your Arctic biome. And I like to start with the Arctic and the Antarctic for a particular reason. It's because it tells me how much room in between the North and the South poles, how much room do I have to work with, how many continents do I want to add, what shapes are the continents. So starting with the Arctic and Antarctic is a way of framing the world, and then you can kind of decide how much space you're working with in the middle, where the equator is, the subtropics, the tropics, the temperate zones and frigid zones, right? Now, what's so great about the path tool is that if you don't like the first design you come up with, then you can always work on another one. So you have another variation there. If you're not happy with that variation, then try another variation. And this is really helpful because sometimes when you just paint in your landmass, whether it's with the add mode of the mask tool or if you're painting it with a texture with your brush tool, is sometimes you make a mistake. You don't like the shape. You don't like what you did. With the path tool, you can come up and draw the shapes that you like. When you finally come up with the shape that you like, then you can kind of fill that in with a texture or with the add mode of the mask tool. It's just easier that way, right? So I'll go ahead and we'll stick with that first Arctic region. I kind of like that one the most. Looks kind of nice. And you can also use this line work, the longitudes and latitudes, to kind of decide a little bit how the land masses are going to bend a little bit. So those lines are also a guide for how you put down your land masses, not just to look good. They're there to help you, right? It's a guide. Now, after you've done the Arctic, I like to do my Antarctic. That's going to be at your South Pole. Now that I've got that general shape, I have them. Remember, now you have that space in between. It's framing it. So now you have the space in between. You know what you're working with. Think of it as your palette or your canvas space, how much room you have to work with there. Let's go ahead and make our other continents with the same method. All I really did was just use the path tool. One moment here, I'll turn them on. All right, I got a couple continents here. Let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look. So I've got only about several continents here. You have the Arctic, Antarctic, a small island that's right here, a small kind of continent, and then we have a really large one right here. And I like throwing in a super large one, like a supercontinent, because it's kind of fun to throw in. And then some smaller continents over here on the side. Now, of course, when it comes to like your world map, there might be continents on the other side of the globe. And technically, you would resize this map. And the way that you resize a map is with the grid tool. And you'd want to resize it. You double the length when you go to the resize like this, and you go over like this. what you want to do is when you check with the resize, you want to check the up at the top, new scene from region. You want to double the width, and then you can put a second globe to the left or to the right. Okay, so I'm just going to show you how to do one side of a globe, because once you get one side, then you'll be able to do the other side as well. So there's no need to do two. But technically, if you wanted to get both sides of the globe, of course, you would make two circular projections side by side, one being the front, one being the back, right? Okay, all right. I'm just going to go ahead and turn that off. I'm not really needing that anymore. Let's talk about a little bit about biomes, climate zones, and seeing things like that. How do you know where certain biomes are? So let's check that out. I'm going to go into my climate zones here. Let's talk about our first climate zone, which is going to be your tropics. Okay, well, let me go ahead and turn off the the line work. I'm not really needing that right now, so let's just turn it off. There we go. All right. So your tropics is going to be your equator, and remember, I used the grid. I used 3 cells going up and down to kind of create that tropic zone. And some of the biomes you find in the tropics are going to be like jungle, desert, mangroves, forests, swamps, grasslands, but it's not limited to. There's a lot of different biomes. It's very diverse you can find in the tropics, but these are just some of them to kind of give you an idea, like, oh, wait, what kind of biomes do I find in the tropics? Let's go ahead and go on to the subtropics. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. In the subtropics, I just used 2 grid cells. I went up. Technically, these would be like, I think these are like Capricorn, and I forgot the other one that would be on the Earth, but your subtropics include biomes like jungle, savanna, swamp, desert, chaparrals, forests. And by forests, it can be deciduous, it could be coniferous, or it can be a mix of both. Okay? A chaparral, if you're not familiar with what a chaparral is like a wooded area that's kind of hilly and it's next to the ocean. So it's right along the coastline. Now, after subtropics, you have your temperate zones. And your temperate zones would include things like grassland, temperate rainforests, which is a mix between deciduous and coniferous forests, more chaparrals, a cold desert, and actually a lot more, but I couldn't fit them all in here. But there's actually a lot of options. Definitely research and find out, because there's a lot of different biomes. The Earth is very diverse, definitely a good source of inspiration for your map. But you don't have to follow Earth physics and all of Earth biomes. Be creative, come up with your own, right? Now, the last of the zones is the frigid zones, and that's where your Arctic and Arctic is. That's where you're going to find what's called permafrost, with places like tundra and taiga, which is a type of forest. Okay, so that's all the different kind of biomes that you can find in those regions. There's more, of course, but those are just to name a few. Let's go ahead and turn those off, but that's a guide to help you out later, just in case you're not certain. Next, once you've kind of established what each zone is for your climates, now you can decide your biome guides. And I've always done this in the past, but I make biome guides with the path tool. And I've even thrown in a little stamp to represent what it is. That's a jungle tree, and I've used a green path to represent that biome. I'm going to have a jungle biome right here in that dark green. In that light green, you have forests, and you notice that I put it both a coniferous tree and a deciduous tree, because forests, or it can be both. Oh, if you're looking for the biome breakdown, just clone and edit the map that's in the chat at the top, okay? And you'll find that there. It's a group, it's hidden, so you just have to change the opacity. Okay. So you notice that I've also used a purple path to represent savanna or grassland, and I put a piece of grass in there. I also used some desert, and I used a yellow path to kind of represent desert. See, there's a dune there. This is really helpful in your pre-development of any map, even whether it's a globe, a world map, whatever. It's always helpful to put your biomes together by using paths to represent the zoned areas, and then put in a stamp to kind of help remind you, or just put a key to the side. It's up to you. But me personally, I like to throw a stamp in there to represent what kind of stamps I'll be using in there if I decide to use stamps. Just so you know, there are different ways that you can go about stamping or putting the color onto your globe map. You can make it a parchment globe. You can make it a realistic looking globe by painting in all the different textures. You can throw in stamps if you want to give it a more stylized look to it, because clearly you would not be able to see any mountains, any trees, individual trees, or anything like that at this scale. Technically at this scale you would just see a mixed mash of colors, but it's okay if you want to go stylized. It's okay if you want to have some of the mountains be, technically they would be massive in reality at that scale, but it's stylized, right? You just want your players to look at something nice. You want to throw in stamps. And I'll go over what stamps to use and some guides on what angles to use and what kind of stamps to use when you're putting your stamps together. But the biome guide is the next step. Once I've kind of got all the biome guides figured out, the next step is to paint in each one of those zones with a texture, okay? That's going to be the base texture. You'll be doing all the blending into those textures later, but the base textures is where you want to start. Now, because I can't hide colors, I used paths, but technically you would be using textures. So let me go ahead and turn off that stamp guide. I won't be needing that right now, so let me turn off that biome guide. We've already got the colors down. You got a general idea of what I'm trying to make here. So basically you want to start with not flat colors, but a texture that has a lot of artifacts and textures in it, right? So it's great to use like a snow texture that might have some rocks in it, or might have some thawed sections in it. There are lots of different types of textures that you can use, but using textures that have a lot of artifacts and a lot of texture to it is helpful because it's doing some of the work for you. Later, we'll be using filters to add a little bit more texture as well, so that way it's less work for you. In the tool, no need to do all the details when sometimes just a simple filter will do the work for you. Work smarter, not harder. If you're a paid contractor and you're trying to bring in the daily bread by selling some maps to clients, you're always looking for tips and tricks that are going to help you to make a map quicker because you're on a time crunch. You might have several clients. They might have a deadline. So do the things that are going to speed up your process, all right? Okay, so now that I have colors there, you might be asking, well, how do I blend? How do I blend? Blending is not complex. Blending is actually really, really easy. And it's as simple as just making sure that you have both base textures that you've used. So if I wanted this dark green texture right here, if I wanted these two zones right here to blend with each other, these two zones right here, what you would do is you would take both the base textures that you used, and then you would do small dots to diffuse. Diffuse means to remove some definition, right? So there's a line, as you can see, normally there's a line, right? Between the biome. You don't want the line in between that biome. You want to diffuse that line by doing little dots with both textures going in and out of the line, diffusing, breaking up the line, making it look like it's in patches, right? That it's ruined a little bit. That is how you blend. If you want more details on blending, there are videos on our YouTube channel that will help you with that. But that's the basics of blending, and it's much easier than you think. You just use little dots of either texture and you go in and diffuse those lines so that way it doesn't look like there's a line, okay? Because you do want to blend your textures together to make it look right. Not as difficult as you think, can be time consuming. One thing that you can do is to use the edgy brush. You can use the edgy brush with a smaller, you just turn the smooth off or turn the smooth on, up to you. Bring the cells or the roughness down a little bit, and then drop the opacity quite a bit. Bring the opacity down quite a bit. And so using this edgy shape right here is really, really helpful to blend. Just remember, you're diffusing that line. You don't want to have a straight line. You want to break it up. So that's really as simple as blending goes. Let's go ahead and turn this off. All right, now you get the basics of blending. Let's talk a little bit about, once you've kind of done all that, you want to blend all of them together. And then what's helpful is to also take variations. So you can take a texture that you used. Let's just say that you used a certain green texture. Let's go into Fantasy Battle Maps real quick. Well, actually, you probably won't be using Battle Maps for this. You'll probably be using Fantasy World. Let me open that up real quick. One thing that's really, really helpful is that if you're using a texture, you can use the advanced settings. If you go down, click advanced settings, you can change the brightness of a texture. And sometimes what's really helpful is to show elevation, is to use a lighter texture to show that a region on your map is higher up, and using a darker variation of that texture to make it look down. Remember, you use depth to create, and you use depth by using contrast. So the darker a region is, the lower it is, while a higher region is going to be brighter and closer to you. And the reason why that is because it's being hit with more sunlight, right? A lower region like a crevice or something that's hidden behind a mountain would be darker, right? Because light is being hidden. So when you're doing it, just make sure that you save one lighter version and one darker version, drop the opacity, and slowly with your brush go into each region and kind of put in, you know, a lighter or a darker region. So light and dark contrast is how you create depth. All right, let's talk about stamps. Let's say that you want to add in stamps into your map, then you have to understand what stamps to use on certain areas of your globe. Let's turn off our grid for right now. I'm going to go ahead and turn on Stamp Angle Guide. And when you're putting down stamps, you need to know when to rotate it, how to scale it, and where to put certain stamps, like will certain stamps be isometric, and what parts of the map will use top-down stamps. Now, top-down stamps are only going to be used, let's say, in this kind of circular region right here. So now you can use fantasy battle maps, or you can use watercolor battle maps, and you can use those stamps when you decide to put stamps in that center part of your globe. The other area outside of it, this area right here outside of it, you're going to use Fantasy World, Fantasy Regional, Fantasy Parchment stamps, okay? Whichever style you decide to use. And the reason why is because as the planet curves, you'll be able to see from the horizon, which is around this part right here, this circular part, you'll be able to see stamps that are like mountains and stuff like that, or trees. You'll be able to see them. So it's up to you. Hey, a rating party of 7. Thank you so much. Hey, thank you, Fumble folks. Awesome. Okay. All right. Wonderful party time. So now that you kind of have that guide there, it kind of gives you a general idea of where you're going to be placing stamps. You'll also notice that there are lines that are facing outward like this. This is going to be helpful because all of your stamps in your isometric are going to be rotated to fit with those lines. So if you put a stamp right here, like a mountain, its base is going to be facing towards the center of the globe. And you want all of your stamps, whatever it might be, a mountain or maybe a hill or whatever, it's going to be facing where the base goes into the center like this. So that's a general rule, is that you want the base of the stamps, that's the bottom of the stamps, to be facing into the center of the globe. So that way you won't accidentally have the wrong angle, okay? That's what those dashed lines are for. They're there to kind of help you to figure out which direction your stamp should be rotated in, right? I'll go ahead and turn my stamp angles down a little bit and the opacity, and then I'll kind of put down just a couple stamps to help you out on where you're going. Let's go ahead and leave it right there. Let's go and turn on stamps, and I'll show you a little bit, not too much, but a little bit on what you can do. So you will notice there's that circle right here. And of course, you'll notice that all the stamps in that circle are going to be top down. You'll notice that these dunes right here are top down. Those dunes also are really interesting. They kind of work well as mountains too. And of course, what's really nice is you can use the luminosity blend mode when you select the stamp. And once you've selected that luminosity blend mode, it will pick up whatever texture is below it. Now, it might be too bright or too dark depending on how much brightness or darkness is in the stamp. So of course, you will have to adjust the lightness and brightness, or just the brightness setting in HSBC. If you don't know where that is, I can kind of show you. But HSBC is whenever you select a stamp like this, you'll find the HSBC at the bottom here. And of course, when you change that blend mode to luminosity, you'll notice that it's picking up whatever texture is below it. Give it a moment here to load. See how it's picking up that green texture there, the yellow underneath there. It's picking up blue. It turns gray against black. But of course, you'll have to change the brightness of it so it will match more correctly. So you notice here that when I put this stamp down right here like this, let me turn this shadow off as it makes it pops out. You notice that I have to change the brightness a little bit more. So it's somewhere on the relatively same brightness. Or let me give another example right here. In here, I want to pick up this tree right here. Right? You change that blend mode to luminosity, and you'll have to change that brightness just a little bit, just because it might be so bright that it doesn't match with it, or it might be too dark. So just remember, you'll have to do some adjusting. It's not too much work. It's pretty easy. And of course, you notice though, but when I did the stamps on the outside, let me zoom in here and you can kind of see it. Notice right here that these stamps right here, I'm using isometric stamps right here. But you notice that it's, what is it doing? What are the base of the stamps doing? They are facing, of course, into the center, right? Same thing with these ones. Same thing with these. See, I've got the degree on it right next to it right here. You can see this is at 15 degrees. This is at 0 degrees, which is the default setting. This is at 34 degrees. All right, so just to make sure that all the base of the stamps are facing towards the center of the globe. It's not that complex. It's pretty easy, right? Now you might ask, well, how is it that you might know where to put your mountain ranges? You know what? The path tool is the almighty Omni tool. I can tell you right now, it's the best thing on the planet. So if you kind of struggle with figuring out where to put mountain ranges, whether you're going to paint them in or whether you're going to use stamps, you know what you do? You just use a good old path, right? A path is how you do it. And all you need to do is just create a little path, make a little squiggly mark to kind of represent where your mountains are. Remember, it's a guide. It's not your final thing. You're going to end up deleting these lines. So don't worry about making them perfect. So just make the path on where you want. And you know, the easiest place to put paths, by the way, at least in my opinion, is really in between biomes. So for instance, like maybe a mountain range would look really good against right about right here, right? And that's where maybe this whole continent right here smashed into this continent right here, right? So, and that's generally where a lot of mountains are, is when two mountains will or two landmasses will collide over millions of years and push the mountain ranges up. So if you struggle with figuring out where to put your mountain ranges, hey, it's easy. Right where your biomes are, right where the biome borders are, is a great place to do it. It's not a for sure thing. It's not entirely scientific, but the beauty of map making is you're representing mountains or representing a map. You don't have to make it perfect. Believe me, if you are hardcore dedicated to realism, I commend you for that, but oh man, there's going to be so much work in your future. So it's okay if you can lean off a little bit on the realism. Remember, it's just the representation of a map. If you wanted to make a realistic map, then just use Google Maps. Use a radar or not a radar, sorry, but a satellite image or things like that. But when it comes to using Inkarnate, map representations can be varying from highly stylistic to very close to realistic, right? So it's up to you and what you're looking for. Just know, again, more realism means more freaking work. So don't do that to yourself. Okay, now that you kind of got that part down, let's talk about light and shadows, because you're going to want to know, how is it that I add some, how do I add some magic to, how do I make the globe look like it's 3D? And light and shadow is the way to do it. It's the best way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off my stamp guide here. We don't no longer need that. There we go. That goes off. Okay. Let's talk about light and shadow and how that works. Now, what's really great about the path tool, again, the path tool all over again, is that the path tool can do lighting and shadow, and you want to use basically a path. Let me go ahead and select this path, and you'll kind of see the settings that I'm at here. But basically, you're going to choose color black. You're going to choose shadow, boost them both all the way up as far as they can go. And you're going to have a blur on, and you're going to have the blur radius be all the way up. Okay. So when I take this path like this and I put it over the map, oopsie, it's supposed to be black. Bear with me here. Okay, there we go. Right there, there we go. Come on now, you can do it. Uh-oh. Oh, well, shoot. Okay, that must be an error of some kind. Let me go ahead and set it all up. There you go, path. Let me go ahead and put a path down. Okay, so you'll notice that when I put this path down, it looks all a little blurry. Wait a minute, what is going on here? Am I set to the right blend mode here? Let me see here. I think it needs to be set to overlay. Let me just verify. Uh-oh. Oh, there seems to be a bug here. Let me try doing it again. One moment. Okay, let's try this. One moment. Okay. Uh-oh. Why is it? Oh, there it goes. I wonder why it's not showing up. That's bizarre. There we go. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity down just a little bit. There we go. All right. Let's go with around... Yeah, definitely time to save and refresh, right? Okay. Now, the reason why I'm using overlay is a very specific reason, because overlay will still retain the information. So if I put a path over something like this, set to overlay, it's still going to relay the information below it. If it was just set to normal, if I go back to normal, you'll kind of notice that it drowns out some of the information underneath it. So overlay is a way for it to retain the information that's below it, the path. And what you first want to do is you want to decide where your light source is coming from. That's step one. So we'll go ahead and add that in. Let's put our light source. For me, I always put light sources in the pretty standard place. I usually put them right here. So the light source is coming from the top left-hand corner. Okay. And we'll move this over to here. All right. Okay. So now you know where the light source is. I like to start by making the shadow first. And all you have to do is just follow the arch of the planet first, curve, and then just start putting in your first pass. And I'm using a mouse. Okay, it's a little bit of work, but you'll start to see the shadows coming in there. This is just your first pass. Just kind of go over it like this. There we go. Get a little bit more curve here. Okay. There's your first one. Okay. Now you're going to add a second one. Remember, it's going to get darker the further and further it goes away from the light source. So we've added that first layer of darkness to the right, bottom right side. You'll add another layer underneath, add another layer right here, and you're going to continue to add a little bit more shadow to this side. There you go. And then feel free to do another one as well. Just do one more along this edge right here. Nice and dark on that back edge, on the bottom right there. There you go. Okay. So now there's the dark side. Now you can paint as much as you want, how much dark side that you want. That's up to you. You can bring it all the way up to here if you want, and just keep adding more to it, up to you. So if you want it to be nice and dark, you can totally do that. up to you. So how dark is up to you, how much path you want to put down. The next one is the light side. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the light source as it's no longer needed. Okay, real quick, turn that off. And I can tell you right now that you go ahead and use a white path with a white shadow, exact same things that I did with the black. Just take that black path and then just change the shadow color and the fill color to white, okay? Then when you apply that to the next side, and I'm noticing that it's not showing up there, so I gotta go white here and then do white here. And the same thing that I did on the dark side, I'm now gonna do on the light side. So I go ahead in here like this. Remember, overlay, and then I'm just gonna add as much light as I feel necessary to this side. Remember, you're gonna do it in 3 layers, so we'll do the first layer. Okay, then do another one. There you go. Okay, that looks nice. I'll let that load. And then one more. Oopsie, didn't mean to do that, my mistake. Okay, so now you see a little bit more of the globe in there, so that's kind of nice. So you have those different shadows. Oopsie, I did not mean to accidentally do that. Let me just undo that real quick. There we go. Perfect. Right, so now you have a light side and a shadow side, and you can, it's wherever you really want to decide where the light source is, that's up to you. Okay, now once you've kind of done that, then you can go back to your line work, and you can turn your line work back on, and you can kind of see what it looks like with the line work here. So I'll turn that back on. Okay, and now you can kind of see the North and South Pole, and your globe is kind of coming together a little bit. And remember, I used the longitude and latitude lines, I used text, and I used the overlay blend mode. And of course, if you don't want the line work to be too overpowering, you can select the whole line work group that you've created and just drop the opacity, and the line work will be less obtrusive. Okay, so it's up to you. Just make sure you group all the lines, and in that way, as a group, you can change the opacity as a whole, all the lines, instead of changing them individually. Groups are your friends. Absolutely do them, right? So absolutely do groups. Now you can also use that shadow technique as well if you wanted to make certain regions of your oceans to be a little bit darker. You can do that exact same thing, that dark shadow text. You can use that technique. So I'll go back to black, of course. And sometimes it just works better, because sometimes when you paint, you might make a mistake. You have to repaint over that again, right? But with a path, you can delete the path if it's not right. So if I put this dark like this, I can go ahead and create regions that might be a little bit darker, right? So I'm doing some of that shadow work. So I can even do it over here. And normally the areas that are furthest away from land are going to be the deepest parts. So that's where you would do it. You would do it in the regions where there's furthest away from land masses, okay? So you can also add in depth to your oceans by just using that black path technique, right? Really as simple as that, okay? Now there are a couple things that you can also do to make your land masses pop out a little bit more, and this is a stylized thing. It's not very realistic, but it's a stylized technique that will help to make your map pop out. But you can just change the blur radius, bring it down a little bit, so it's a little bit smaller. We can even bring the opacity up, and we can bring the blur down. There we go. And let's also change the blur shadow just a little bit. Let me take a look at it. That looks fine. Let's bring the width down just a little bit more. Okay. And I will bring the opacity a little bit up. You can make your land masses look like they're popped out a little bit more by just taking a dark shadow and putting it along the edge right here. Now let me just go ahead and zoom out real quick, and you can take a look at it, see what it looks like at a distance. And what this does is it makes it feel like the land mass is popped out. And you can put that path only on faces where it's facing you. So any face behind you doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And by that I mean you wouldn't do faces like let me zoom in a little bit here. You wouldn't do this backside right here because you can't really see the face. But the objective here is to kind of make the landmasses look like they have a 3D effect, like they're popping out a little bit. That's kind of the objective of using a shadow or a path underneath landmass shorelines, so that way it looks like they really are kind of popping off the map. That's a stylistic choice. It's not necessarily going to be something that you might decide to do. It's entirely up to you whether or not you want to do that or not. Okay? But you get the general idea, right? Okay. Let's go ahead and delete all these paths. Don't really need them. The last couple steps really are just to do, once you've kind of figured out whether you want to use stamps, whether you want to do texturing and all that stuff, once you've kind of figured out whether that's the stuff you want to do or not, then you want to apply filters. And filters are a great way to kind of add in. Let's go ahead and, oops, let's keep these paths in here. Copy, paste, put it over here. I wanted to put them in those dark regions. Oopsie. So paths are really helpful. Omni tool, right? You don't just use it to show a road or a path that takes you to A to Z, or it can be used for a lot of different things. So be creative, be surprised how much you can do. Blend modes are going to be your savior, okay? All right, so the next step that I like to do is to decide, like, maybe what style am I going to do this with, right? Am I just going to leave it like this and just have the colors, or do I want to add maybe some more texture to it? So if you go to texture filters, and then the filter tool is going to be right here. Notice it's the filter tool. It looks like a magic wand. It's got some stars above it. Just click that and then click add new filter, and then click this plus button right across from texture filters. Click that, open it up. And there are a couple options that you can use. If you ended up not adding enough texturing to your oceans or to your land masses, and that frustrates you and you don't want to go back and do all that again, what you'll do is when you first open up the filter catalog, it's going to be open to whatever style you're in. We're in Fantasy Regional HD. If you were looking for more options, just click over to the Inkarnate tag, give the catalog to load the art real quick, and all the textures will pop up, okay? So there are a couple textures that you can use. Old paper, which is a parchment world, works fantastic. But just know that it's not going to work at its default settings because this texture filter is not set for this style. It's set for the worlds, for the parchment world style. So you have to change that blend mode to overlay. You're seeing a common theme with overlay, right? Overlay allows you to kind of overlay your map with a bunch of with textures, right? Without it affecting areas that are pure black, because you can't see those, right? Let me turn it off and you'll see the difference that it made, right? It added a lot more texture to your map, right? Whether maybe you want to make it look more parchment, you want to have more ruffles, maybe you want to add in some darker and lighter regions. This is the way to do it. Using the old paper texture is a great way. Watch what happens when I bring it to 100 opacity, right? Then it really, 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 really gives it that kind of spotted look, right? And of course, I can bring it down if I don't want as much. I can put in less, okay? Now the other blend mode, or not blend mode, but the other texture you can use is grain as well. Grain will add kind of a uniform kind of feel to it. Let me go ahead and just let it affect. So it should be set to overlay. You'll want to change it. I change it to repeat so that it can be a bit smaller. So we'll change that size. And this is another way of adding some granulation to your map. So you notice that you didn't have to paint all that in. You let a filter do it for you, and it adds some nice granulations in there, and that looks super nice. So some granulation is a nice thing that you can add to your globe map. Let's go ahead and take a look at some color filters that could be really, really useful. So I'm going to go ahead and turn these off. We'll just delete that. Go over to color filters. Color filters are a way of kind of making your colors on your map blend together better, because sometimes it doesn't look right when you've added all these different colors to it. So a way of blending all your colors is with color filters. Clarity is a good one. It'll make your colors pop out. But you can also use other ones like faded to kind of give it a more faded look if you wanted to. You could add saturation to give it more color popping out. You can add sharpness to it, and that's going to make all the artifacts seem a little bit sharper. You can add sepia if you want it to have a kind of more yellowish kind of look. If you want it to be in black and white, you can absolutely use this grayscale, black and white, and also HSBC also has great options for this. You want to give it a more bluish tint. You can use winter, red sky if you want to pull out some of the reds, right? You want to make it a night scene, okay? And maybe you want to have a bunch of cities, like maybe say it's nighttime or something on this side. This is the dark side of the planet. You could throw in little light sources too if you wanted to show like a grid of lights to represent a city. Absolutely, you can do that. And then you also have overcast, parchment, cold, warm. All of these are great filters to kind of cause the colors on your map to blend together. And then cold, warm, which is going to bring out cool and warm colors on your map. So really up to you how many filters that you want to add in, but they are very, very helpful for blending things, adding more artifacts, more texture to your map, because why do more work, right? It's a lot of work to paint your map, okay? So just do a base texture, maybe blend a little bit between your biomes, and then maybe just throw in variation for contrast with light and dark to kind of create elevation a little bit. And then of course, just throw down your filter to throw in all the extra texture that you want. Remember, do less work. Let the tool do the work for you. Why should you have to spend 5 hours doing all this texturing when a filter will do? Okay? So that is about it. That's about it. Now, I don't know about if you wanted something far more realistic, then you're absolutely going to want to check out satellite footage. That will be more helpful to you if you want more realistic. But this is the method that I use to make my globes. And of course, you can go way more realistic. You can add all the longitudes, all the latitudes if you want. There's a lot of them. So like I said, I limited the number of longitude and latitude lines because it just takes up too much room on the map. But it is a great guide to help you out when placing landmasses and stuff like that. So yeah, that's really about it for this one. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'll go ahead and mention the next streams. And of course, if you have suggestions for future streams, you totally need to go to our Discord server. Go ahead and get the hashtag roles. Going to go to the roles channel. Make sure you get that Inkarnate role, and then go to the stream request channel and go ahead and just scroll down. There's not a million requests like feature requests and our art requests. There's only about several dozen. So, and I constantly delete streams that were created in it, so that list is growing and shrinking depending on streams that I add. Okay, so if you have any ideas about future streams, please leave those requests. Believe me, the more votes that your stream requests get, the more likely that I will do them. So super excited. Let's go ahead and go back here. We're going to go over the stream calendar real quick and kind of see what's next. You can find all 3 of these maps, by the way, on my profile if you want to clone and edit them. I don't think this one is available since it was made with the room tool, so it's not clonable right now, but the Wizard's Globe and this globe map right here are available to you if you want to use it. Let me go back to my maps here. Let's check out what we're going on with the next future streams here. So we just finished globe maps. Next, we're going to do fantasy regional. We're going to do scenes. And I'll show you my method on how I make scenes, whether it's touching base on foreground, the middle ground, and background layers that I'm going to be using to compose a scene to create depth. And I'll show you how I make my scenes. And scenes are really fun, really, really helpful, because sometimes theater of mind just doesn't cut it. So this stream is for you if you want to have some visuals for your players to see, whether it's the inside of a tavern, or it's a forest scene, or that's the first thing that your players see at the beginning of the campaign, or whatever, right? So scenes are really, really helpful when you want to give a visual for your players in your campaign. That's going to be next Wednesday. And of course, following the 23rd, we're going to be doing realistic water with fantasy battle maps. So just in case you want your water watery battle maps to have a little bit more realistic water, whether you can see things under the water, whether you want to add in depth, how do I make my waves look more realistic? How is it that I create reflections in my water? All of those things I'm going to be teaching you, and how to create realistic water. And of course, the last stream of the month is going to be Castles Part 1. And this is going to be a long going kind of stream with multiple parts, because we're going to be touching base on where you would build your castle on the landscape, how you would build your walls, construct the layout, all of those things. So this is going to be a really, really long stream, or a long series. So part 1 will be, of course, just how you go about surveying the land, where you're going to put your castle, and the beginning construction phases. All right. Well, that's it, everybody. That's the end of the stream. Thank you so much. Super, super excited about realistic water and castles. That's going to be fun. And of course, scenes are going to be really exciting. All right. So, hey, thank you so much for watching. It was great having you here. I'm looking forward to seeing you again. Don't forget to join our Discord server. Hey, first-time chatter. Glad to have you here. Thank you so much, everyone. If you missed the stream or you missed it, you can always go back. And of course, we always add this to our YouTube channel. All right. Hey, thank you so much. Please stay safe and healthy. Merry map making. And I will see you all soon, okay? Take care, everybody.